Hello and welcome to Language of the Soul podcast. I'm your host, Dominic Domingo.
And I'm your co-host, Virginia Grenier.
We'd like to invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy some inspiring conversation. Here at Language of the Soul, we know that life is story. Individually, we're the products of the stories we tell about ourselves. Culture is the amalgamation of the stories we weave about the human condition. Here's the thing. Individually and collectively, we can write our own story. Thanks for tuning in and joining in the march toward human potential.
Before we dive in, I encourage you to subscribe on Buzzsprout or join our Patreon community for exclusive content. Your ratings and reviews help us grow, so please take a moment to share the podcast with friends and family. Every bit of support helps us reach more hearts and minds. Let's get started.
Angela van Breemen is a graduate of the University of Guelph with a degree in management economics and was a co-owner of a dental supply company. After the company was sold, she turned her focus to writing, music, and volunteering her time at Procyon Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, located in Breemen, Ontario. Her first novel, Past Life's Revenge, a crime thriller with a twist of spiritualism, was released in July 2024. She belongs to the Wordsmiths, based out of Alliston, Ontario, is a member of the Crime Writers of Canada and South Simcoe Arts Council. Music and poetry have been an integral part of her life, and in April 2024, she launched her debut album, In the Breeze. Celtic in nature, it includes 3 original pieces of music based on her poetry. Angela is a soprano soloist. A firm believer in giving back to the community, she loves to sing for different charitable organizations. She lives in Loretto, Ontario. Welcome, Angela van Breemen.
Well, thank you so much for that lovely introduction. I truly appreciate that. And it's great to be here.
Well, we're lucky to have you. Did I get everything right in the bio, or is there anything
Oh,
you'd like to correct?
100%. That's perfect. Absolutely.
Oh, right on. Well, using it as a springboard, first of all, you're very versatile. I'm sure you heard that. It seems like you have quite a few vehicles of expression. So I'm going to ask you about that in just a minute. But I also see, as with a lot of our guests, there can be a real practical slant to like one's earlier career. But it seems like you're on fire creatively, and you're really, I don't want to assume anything, but it seems like you've embraced your creativity and sort of stepped into it. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's absolutely fair to say. And really, it's almost coming back full circle for me in a lot of ways, because when I was younger, I had those passions with writing poetry, which I never did stop writing the poetry, but I had the passions for wildlife. I had the passion for singing. And so I think that I've had the ability now, with having sold the business, and it's been 11 wonderful years, are pursuing those passions more fully. So it's more like throwing myself into something, but with the knowledge that I've sort of come full circle and returned back to my true interests and my true heart
Yeah,
of
I was
what
going to say
makes me who I
essence.
am.
Yeah, beautiful. It's like
Yeah.
coming home, isn't it? It
Yeah,
sounds,
absolutely. That's a beautiful way to describe it.
it's beautiful. And it's not a luxury per se, it's a choice, right? But
It's
I
a
think,
choice. Yeah.
yeah, it's a gift to embrace our essence. And I relate to a lot of that, you know. I adopted a rescue dog over the pandemic, as Virginia knows, and
Mhm.
he's my soulmate. But like for years, when I was kind of putting my nose to the grindstone at Disney, and sure, I was doing what I loved, but animals were such a big part of my childhood. And
Mhm.
I tried to be a docent at the zoo, but it was kind of a long journey to do that. Any volunteer work seemed like something I couldn't fit in while working 40. So you're my idol for having done what you've done. Do you mind talking about your work with the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center just a little bit?
Oh no, I'd love to. I got introduced to Procyon Wildlife in 2016.
Hmm.
There was a baby squirrel
Hmm.
who basically what happened was, we have a friend who has an antique shop called the Past Glories of Toad Hollow. And he, in his old location in the wintertime, it was for storing cars, classic antique cars.
Hmm.
And in the summer, he would convert it over into an antique mall. And it was just a glorious transformation. Anyway, we were visiting, my husband and I were visiting him, and he was just getting things set up for the antique portion because it was summer.
Hmm.
And he says, it's funny, there's this little squirrel that's been coming around. He's so friendly. And I think he's hungry though, and he's really little. I took one look at the squirrel and I said, well, that's a baby squirrel. And I think he is hungry.
Hmm.
So I did a little bit of research and I came across Procyon Wildlife and I called them. And they said, yeah, that's very likely that this little squirrel is hungry. And they don't really approach humans unless they're desperate for food. So anyway, they sort of got me on the right track as far as setting me up. I became a volunteer, and I actually ended up fostering this little squirrel. And he didn't have any mates that were close enough to his age because usually we try to have the wildlife socialize with with the same age group if we can do
Hmm.
that as long as they're from the same area.
Right.
And so little Sammy, which is what we
I
call him,
was going to ask the name. That's so. The whole time I was
Sammy the
biting my
squirrel,
tongue. I love it.
Sammy the squirrel, he didn't have any squirrels close enough to his age, so he stayed with me a little while as for me to foster him. But when he got old enough to keep his own with other squirrels, I brought him back to Procyon Wildlife, and he got introduced to Colin and to Colin and one other little squirrel.
Those are
So,
very, I have to say, very human names. I've always joked when I did get a dog, I was going to name, or dogs, I would name them Dave and Barbara.
oh, there you go. There you go. Yeah. So, anyway, it was a really nice story because he fell within the 15 kilometers as well as the other two
Mhm,
squirrels
mhm,
within where they were located under the Ministry of Natural Resources rules. We were allowed to actually release them on our property. So
mm,
that was a really fun event as well. We transported them back in their squirrel box. We have volunteers that build these wooden boxes. And so when they are getting used to living outside, we have them in outdoor enclosures until they get used to the elements. But that's sort of their home base.
mhm,
So usually what we do is we get the squirrels into the box, and once they're firmly in the box, then we put mesh on the outside of the opening and
mhm,
duct tape that down, and we transport them in the box.
mhm.
And then we climb trees as high as we can go,
Oh, man.
and then we mount the box on the tree. And then when we
Wow.
know everything is safe and secure, then we take off the opening, you know, the mesh from the opening,
Mhm.
and then we sit there and we wait. And so we
Aw.
waited and waited and waited, and finally Elmer, that was his name. Elmer popped his head out, and then Colin did, Sammy did, and so that was their home base. So basically,
Mhm.
we transported their home into the woods, and
Beautiful.
so they lived happily ever after. At least
Well,
I
I
hope
guess
they
since you
did.
released them on your property, does that mean you get to still see Sammy or no?
Well, we have a lot of eastern gray squirrels, which is interesting. We call the species is called eastern gray squirrels, but they're actually can be either gray, which is a beautiful color, but they can be black as well.
Mhm.
And so these we have a lot of black eastern grays here. And so, you know, eventually I really couldn't tell
Right, right.
um I
I'm
couldn't
just a
really tell them
sucker.
apart, but it was a really rewarding experience to get them back
Beautiful.
into the wild like that.
It's you're doing good work. I
Yes.
asked, if you were able to see him from time to time, just because I'm a sucker
Yeah.
for reuniting. I don't know if either of you have ever seen Born Free and Living Free in the 70s.
Yes, yes, definitely.
Yeah. So there's lion videos where, they'll go out to the savannah and see a lion after 5 years and they get a big hug because the lion
Yeah,
remembers them. That
incredible
warms my heart.
memories.
Mm.
You know, we try to avoid that. As romantic as that notion
Right, right.
sounds, we try to avoid that. So what we do is once any of the wildlife, whether it's raccoons or squirrels or coyotes or fox, it doesn't matter, especially deer.
Hmm.
As soon as they are weaned off the formula, it's
Hmm.
really hands off
Yeah,
completely.
right, right.
And that's why we also group them by the area that they've been originally found, and
Hmm.
also by age group, so that they learn how to be with their
Yes,
own species
right,
and
of
learn
course.
those mannerisms, because they learn from each other through play.
Right.
And so, yeah, we try to avoid that. So, what we don't want is a baby raccoon following us when we've released him. We don't want them habituated to humans. And in the
Right.
case of deer in particular, it's even they actually imprint very easily on
Hmm.
humans.
Hmm.
And so when we are feeding them by bottle, we actually are wearing masks, we're wearing
Hmm.
gowns, like
Hmm.
everybody is trying to look as nondescript in the human form as possible, so that
Right.
those animals don't recognize
Yeah, yeah, it makes
humans.
sense.
Yeah, so that's what
Yeah.
our volunteers do. And our director, our main director, Deborah Spillar, she's devised a system now where we can start feeding the deer. It's a sort of a wooden rack with holes in it, and the bottles go through there. So now we can even go that extra step where we don't actually have to hand feed them, which is even better for being hands off. So
Right.
yeah, that's the process, so that they don't approach. Sometimes you hear about animals that seem awfully tame, and it's because maybe some good-hearted soul has raised them because they found an orphan. Now you have these repercussions of them being too brave.
Yes, it makes perfect sense. I will say in my area, there are a lot of deer. I taught at Art Center for 20 years, and you'd often see deer just grazing on the sculpture garden, or,
Mhm.
you'd be pulling out at night and your headlights pan across, and there's just a big buck standing right there in the middle of the access road. And
Yeah.
it is 100% a matter of they're too domesticated. They have
Mhm.
no fear of humans, and that doesn't bode well during hunting season. And
No.
yeah, and in Tehachapi, where my parents live, people actually feed them, so it compounds the problem.
Yeah.
In my neighborhood, it's coyotes.
Hmm.
So every cat or dog is missing an ear or a tail. There's a real clash between the natives, arguably the coyotes, and us. And
Yeah.
so there are neighbors who feed the coyotes. It's
Oh dear.
completely counterintuitive.
Oh my goodness.
Yep.
We
They're
have
not popular,
these.
by the way, these neighbors. Yeah.
Yeah, no, they don't understand the repercussions. And
Mhm.
one of the things that I do for Procyon, I joined them in 2016,
Mhm.
and I redid their website. They needed an overhaul of the website, and I started a newsletter, and it's called a Procyon Post. So I'm the editor of this particular newsletter, and one of the messages, and we do this once a month, we send out this newsletter, and one of our themes is don't feed the wildlife.
Mm,
And because of the repercussions
of course.
of them being too tame. And
Mhm.
also, if you create a feeding area where rabbits and all these prey animals start congregating in one area, it doesn't give them a fair chance if a fox or coyote does come along the scene, because
Right.
it's sort of easy pickings, right?
Right.
So
Like fish in a barrel.
yeah, exactly. That's a perfect way to
Or sitting
describe it.
ducks to keep on the
Yeah.
animal theme, sitting
Yeah, and
ducks. Yeah.
also diseases can happen if seed is left on the ground too long. It can cause diseases as well. So, really, it's better not to feed
Right.
the wildlife, even as tempting as it is. I mean, they managed without us. Of course, one can argue that we've interfered as mankind quite a
Right.
bit with
Mhm.
the ecosystem, and I certainly do appreciate that. And I just hope that people understand how important coyotes are, because they are an apex predator,
Mhm.
and they are great for keeping rat populations under
Mm.
control,
Mhm.
other rodent populations under control. We need these creatures,
Yes.
but
Yes.
people don't understand. They think, well, he got my cat or he got this or that, but keep
Or
your cats
they look so
inside.
mangy. Yeah.
Yeah, well, if
They get a bad rap, that's for
yeah,
sure.
they get a bad rap. And we do get a number. One of the biggest things for admissions of fox and coyote is mange, actually.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that's a really serious disease that will kill them, but it's
Mhm.
easily treatable. So we have numerous traps out all the time in
Mhm.
order for us to capture these animals, give them a treatment. It takes between 5 and 6 weeks, and then we can release them again.
Nice.
So yeah, mange is a big problem.
Yeah.
So if you have wildlife rescue areas, places in your area, and you spot an animal that you suspect has mange, it wouldn't be a bad idea to solicit help and see if they can capture that animal and give him treatment.
I'll have to ask about that. I'm actually really glad I brought this up. I didn't expect it to lead to this, but just to give a shout out, my niece actually founded Cougar Conservancy. So
Oh,
again, you're in Canada. I don't know how much you know about the Southern California situation, but there, like I said, we've long clashed with again, the first residents, I would say, were encroaching on their territory. So
absolutely.
it's always an adjustment period. So anyway, there's a little wildlife bridge being built. Do you know about that, Virginia, being a
I do.
former native?
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
across the 101. I think it's not the
Hmm.
134, it's the 101.
Yeah.
Anyway, my little niece, I have 22 nieces and nephews, and I'm so proud of her. She founded this organization, and she didn't start the land bridge, the wildlife crossing, but she's very involved in publicizing it and getting funding for it.
That's excellent. The wildlife bridges are essential. Some
Mm,
of them are tunnels, some of them are above ground, but they are absolutely phenomenal. And there's such a great way of preventing deaths on the highway because it's
mhm.
just heartbreaking when you
It
see
is.
so many creatures
It's heartbreaking
that have
because
met
she
their end this way.
tracks them. We they all have names: P22, P23. Everybody in LA knows, especially certain characters, right? And
Mhm.
yeah, I think P22 was just killed on the freeway, and it's heartbreaking,
Oh
especially for my
gosh.
niece. I worked on Lion King. That was my first film at Disney, and she'll say to this day, the reason I'm so passionate about Cougar Conservancy is Lion King,
Oh wow.
Simba.
How
So I
cool is
know
that?
that one broke her heart for sure.
Yeah, yeah, it is heartbreaking. Definitely.
Anyway, well, it seems like when you sold your business, was that a form of retirement that allowed you to get back in touch with animals and your creativity? I'm putting them in one
Well,
category.
yeah, it at first when we sold the company, I was a little bit at loose ends and I didn't throw myself into my artistic nature immediately. It probably took me a number of months to sort of adjust to that change.
Hmm.
Hmm.
And a number of friends who had businesses asked me if I would do some website design for them and other administrative things. So I did because it gave me a little bit of a transition,
Hmm.
and I do help a number of folks with that, but mostly mostly my focus is on Procyon and my artistic endeavors.
Hmm.
But yeah, there was a bit of a transition, but then I always loved singing, but I never had formal singing lessons because I had an unfortunate incident when I was 6 years old. A new school had opened up the year that I went to grade one. There wasn't kindergarten yet.
Hmm.
And so I got thrown into grade one immediately. And one of the teachers was going to put together a choir. And I remember my little self walking down this hallway and going into the auditorium. And so she blew on what I later learned was a recorder, but I had no idea. And she said I should replicate, what I heard. And I really didn't understand what she wanted me to do. I felt too intimidated, actually, by the whole process of walking down the hallway and into this gymnasium. And
Hmm.
so I made a few croaky sounds, and she looked horrified, of course.
Oh no!
And well, you're
Oh,
not
that's
really
horrible.
suitable for the choir.
Oh
And
no! Well,
so
she
I
just
just go
wanted.
back to the classroom.
She
So
was.
I did. And I went home that day and I said to my mom, I said, the teacher says I can't sing. And she says, that's okay, dear. I don't have a good singing voice either. Don't worry about it. It's okay. So my little 6 year old self sort
Hmm.
of had this idea entrenched in my head that I didn't sound good, but I still sang. And growing up in the country, I was always in the forest singing, whatever, because I just loved the feeling of it because it gave me such joy that I made sure that I sang in remote locations so no one could
Right, right.
hear, or so I thought. But then during my university days, I met people who were playing guitars, and it was kind of fun. And so I would sing a little bit with them, but it was never anything serious except that it was fun to do. So after we sold the business, it took me about 8 or 9 months, but I decided that I wanted to take formal singing lessons, and so I had a wonderful opera coach by the name of Marc Dubois, and he's a lyric tenor. And so he began training me. He says normally he doesn't take mature students, but he liked what he heard with my voice when I did my audition.
Mm-hmm.
And so then during the pandemic, of course, things dropped off. And then I found another lovely music coach. Her name is Cynthia Fox Fuchile, and she's an absolute wonderful coach. And what was nice about this, and she's a mezzo soprano, absolutely wonderful. And what was nice about this is it's actually good to have different instructors, because she opened up my horizons in a different way. So it was really fantastic. And so on the CD or on the album, she actually sings one of the pieces with me, which was a real honor to have her on the album as well. So it took me a number of months, as I was saying, to get into that groove of saying you can relax, you can let go, you can open up to your artistic side, and it's been marvelous. It's been wonderful.
Beautiful. Wow. Well, I'm inspired just hearing the story. It does seem like I understand how graphic design was sort of an interim because it's still practical, right? And it's not as
Yes.
expressive as some of the arts. But I get that to kind of, have to take baby steps and then embrace it fully and accept the calling. I think there's a
Yeah.
lot of voices we all have to quiet in order to, right, follow our muse. So that all makes perfect sense. I do want to say I listened to I Will Be in the Breeze. Is that the name
Oh,
of it?
yes.
Yeah,
Did
I
you?
planned to hear the whole album, but I just listened to that track, and then I found Moon River. Did you know that's on YouTube?
Yeah, I put that on.
Oh,
I put up a number of videos during the pandemic because it was cheering people up.
absolutely.
So
Well,
I
that's one
went,
of my favorite songs of all time.
oh, is
So,
it? Oh, how
oh
cool
my
is
God, of
that?
course. Well,
Yeah,
for
I
the
love
same
it. It's so
reasons.
dreamy, and it's so
Uh,
the notion of, going along with the river and just,
mm,
exploring that world that's waiting, right? It's just,
mhm.
yeah.
It's the
Oh, how
most
cool is that?
nostalgic song, right? It's just all about nostalgia.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because of the movie and Audrey Hepburn, and of
Of
course, but
course.
even
But
then, I feel like it was the definition of nostalgia, even in that film.
mhm.
Anyway, I love your voice, and I don't want to say the wrong thing here, but has anybody ever said that you remind them of boop? I'm losing her name on Taxi, Elaine. Do you remember that character, Elaine, on Taxi, Virginia?
I do, but I don't remember the actress
Wow,
name.
I had her name already, and I love her.
Okay.
Did you guys get Taxi in Canada?
We did, but I have to admit, I didn't really watch it.
Well, she's adorable, and it's a compliment. She's so beautiful. The little 11-year-old me had a huge crush on Elaine, and her
Ready?
name will come to me.
It's Elena O'Connor. Can you believe
No,
that?
no, the
Oh,
character is
oh,
Elaine.
Oh, I'm intrigued.
She's great.
yeah, it's
I'll
just
get
saying
back to
it's
you.
Elena O'Connor. What
Okay,
is
don't
it?
worry, it'll come to me. It's that
All right.
anyway. In the
Yeah.
spirit of our podcast, there, in the spirit of the law of attraction and manifestation, I love the idea that actually the reason you can't find your keys, right, is because you have internalized that belief that the keys are lost. The keys are lost. If you
Mhm,
just stopped that neural circuit of the keys are lost, your subconscious knows exactly where the keys are.
mhm.
That happened this morning. This poor, what was it, Amazon delivery guy was cussing. Bowie and I went out for a walk, and he was walking back and forth, looking in the bushes and cussing. And I go, "What are you looking for, dude?" And he had lost his key to
Oh
the
my
Amazon.
gosh.
So, like, he could lose his job if he
Mhm.
takes his time. And I just had that thought this morning, like, actually, it's the neural circuit that blinds you, right? It will not yield the information until you start thinking about something else.
Mhm.
Okay, but her
That's very
name will
true.
come to me. I'll pipe up later in the interview. I
Yes.
got it.
Yeah, that your brain just has to process it for a moment or two.
Yeah, or just let it go, right?
Yeah.
And then germinate on it. Mary Lou Henner. That's it. Okay, check her out. Anyway, I did love your video, and you're very charming as a presence. I'll leave it at that.
Oh,
She's,
thank you. That's so
yeah,
kind.
yes. I relate to what you said too about having different my sister's a vocal instructor, but
Oh,
I also have
terrific.
taught in the arts for 20 years. I founded the entertainment track at my alma mater, and just am lucky enough to have witnessed different relationships with the creative process, and I call them different artistic journeys. And I keep in touch with my students and I see what becomes of them. And I've long said that it's fine to get under the wing of a mentor, right, for a while and really buy hook, line, and sinker whatever it is they have to offer. But man, being judicious is the name of the game, especially in the arts. Because again, for example, in figure drawing, some figure instructors will say, oh, it's structure, 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 structure and anatomy. Then another instructor will say, no, no, it's all about expression. Capture the spirit of the pose, and every stroke can contribute to that spirit. And it's kind of like this war waged between structure and anatomy, and then the gesture, the expression. But you know
Mhm.
what? It's somewhere in the middle, right? And really
Mhm.
magical drawing is somewhere in the middle. So you do see almost this cult like, I don't know, these different instructors have their minions and they never really explore anything else. So I'm a big fan of, yeah, being judicious and exposing yourself to a lot of different sensibilities within your given craft, and then
Mhm.
arriving at your own approach, if that makes
Mhm.
sense.
That, you know what, that is so true because both instructors are very oriented toward opera because my
Hmm.
voice has a lot of operatic elements to it.
Hmm.
But I'm also interested, and I do sing in other genres. And so
Hmm.
for me, I wanted to expand that more. And so what I loved about Cynthia in particular is she helped me explore singing in different styles. And what
Hmm.
was so fun about doing this album is a gentleman by the name of Mark Giammarco from Red Egg Studio. He produced the album for me, and he suggested, that's very operatic the way you're singing this particular Celtic song, but would you consider perhaps, lightening the tone and
Hmm.
singing it in in a different, like a more pop style even.
Hmm. Yep.
And so we experimented quite a bit with a number of songs on the album, and that was so much fun for me because you don't want to get in a rut.
Well,
And
then
it,
you
I think
arrive in
life
new.
is about exploring different expressions with the voice
Absolutely.
or art or whatever it
Hmm.
may be.
Yep. Yeah, I was kind of referring to technique, but you're absolutely right. Like genre and format, and so
Mhm.
much follows because I think you did arrive in new territory. There's, you know, Celtic. What's the female version of Celtic Thunder? I forget the name of that group,
Are you talking
but
about not Celtic women? Or is
yeah,
that
Celtic
yeah?
women, I guess. Anyway, there's a lot that has come before, right? But when you find your own fusion of Celtic or pop and classical, that's where the magic is. So I think you have,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's a
yeah,
beautiful
and that
use of
was
your
what we
voice.
worked on. Yeah,
Hmm.
and that was I was very satisfied with that because I knew I wanted to do Celtic inspired music, but as the album developed and I worked with Cynthia and with Mars and also with Jason Wilson, who's a two-time Juno nominee.
Hmm.
And his music's really amazing too because he has this blend of sort of a Celtic element to it and reggae, and it is the most amazing
Wow.
music. But anyway,
My brain just exploded.
it's awesome. So working with these individuals was just so much fun. I really had the time of my life with that. It was amazing.
Yeah, the creative right, just working on anything with synergy and uh group projects. There's just so much synergy there, and
Mhm.
I'm addicted to creating, so I'm with you. I feel like you might like Kate Bush. Are you familiar with Kate Bush?
Not necessarily. Maybe if I'd heard the music, I'm not sure.
Well, she's a great example of somebody who is trained classically, so she has a rather operatic tone. As early as 78, she came out with Wuthering Heights. You probably know that song.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and her whole career has been using her operatic voice in a pop context, but
Mhm.
it's also got
I
a lot of Celtic instrumentation. So I
Yeah.
loved your arrangements and your instrumentation because I'm a Kate Bush fan.
Oh, okay. I'll have to check that out more thoroughly. That sounds cool.
I love when different genres kind of blend together to create, a new variation to something too. Because when like someone like me, I like very diverse music. I don't have one particular genre that I just gravitate to and only listen to. And so when I hear um, kind of that crossover, it really draws me in because it's something new and fresh. And I just feel like it kind of gets it hits, I think, deeper areas of,
Mm-hmm.
for me, at least when I listen to music, um, it's what I find that's like the way I express what moods I'm feeling is by the music I play.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you think the same applies in literature? Do you feel like genre blends are where the new territory lies?
Yeah, I don't see why not. I think definitely. I think that maybe my book is even a good example because it has a lot of
Mm,
elements of crime in it, but it also is bringing in the supernatural element to the extent that the characters in my story use the paranormal to
hmm.
help solve a mystery that's really plaguing them. And
Yeah, I
I
didn't
like
actually intend that transition, but you're absolutely right. One of
Mhm.
the descriptions I read said a crime novel with a twist of spiritualism. I like that.
Correct. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Hmm.
And to me, the concept of reincarnation and past lives is such a natural one. So I found it comfortable for me to blend that into my story, and
Hmm.
it's a sort of a seamless. Like to me, I don't really. I find that it's a seamless transition by incorporating that into a crime, what is essentially a crime novel. But yeah, it's I
Yeah,
like that for
yeah,
sure.
and for me as a reader, I'm a writer, but I'm also a reader, of course, and I do tend to respond to genre blends, I guess, because they're not as formulaic, right?
Mhm.
They're not as bound by the tropes of a given genre or format.
Yeah,
So,
you're
like
right.
with horror movies, I always thought, yeah, I'm not a big fan of slashers, obviously. But when I was asked to co-write a screenplay, and I was hesitant, but I thought, I have liked certain horror movies over the years, and it's always the ones with metaphysical overtones, or do you know what I mean? Like spiritual overtones. It's not just the cut and dry slashers.
Mhm.
So anyway, I guess I would ask you then, we are jumping into this now. So I want to ask you what inspired the novel. And I'm guessing it is your view of the relationship between the metaphysical and the what everyday.
Yes,
I'm guessing
yeah.
the beliefs were there before you formulated this concept
Oh,
for the
since
novel.
yeah, since childhood actually. So the how this book came about is the sort of a curious thing, and again, sort of talking about that full circle that I was alluding to earlier, where
Hmm.
you're coming back to your roots. So basically, growing up as a kid, my mom and dad were always inviting psychics and mediums over, and it was completely natural and normal to talk about past lives and supernatural experiences and past life regressions and reincarnation. Like it was just really spoken about.
Wow.
And
Hmm.
so that really was rooted really in my whole being as I grew up.
Hmm.
When I was in my early 20s, I had an idea for a book. And as I explained, I've been writing poetry since a young age, and I've never stopped writing the poetry. But what was interesting is I thought in my early 20s that I would write a book. And I started this book actually. And life got busy. I got a full time job. I met my future husband. And so things got busy and distracting. And I put that, it was about a third done. I just put the manuscript away in a drawer and literally forgot about it.
Hmm.
And so, fast forward to December of 2022, my husband had just published his first novel. His name's Peter Ponsa, and his book is called Outfoxed. And I was really impressed that he did that. And I was cleaning out my drawers in December of 2022, and I came across the manuscript again, and I thought, instead of shoving it back in the drawer,
Right.
why don't you at least look at it? Why don't you at least read it? I said to myself. So I
Hmm.
sat there and I read it and I thought, well, there's a lot of change because don't like the wording so much, don't, but the concept I really
Hmm.
like.
Hmm. Right.
So I started between Christmas and New Year, I started rewriting the part that I had already written like 35 odd years ago.
Right.
And then I got to the end of that section and thought, oh my gosh, what do I do now? Like my guide was gone because it was new territory. And I just sat there and I meditated and I thought, you know what? Let's plot out the next third of the book. So
Mhm.
I plotted out the next third of the book, wrote furiously, And then when I got to that section, I plotted out the final third of the book.
Hmm.
I was done by the end of May.
Wow.
And then I had a few trusted, I belong to the writers group, which you had mentioned when you introduced me, the
Hmm.
wordsmiths. So I had a number of friends who beta read for me from the writers group.
Hmm.
And also a very dear friend. She is a published author, Diane Bader, and she did an edit of my book and made suggestions, valuable suggestions. And then it was time for me to go into the studio, and I knew that it would be good to just put that manuscript aside, and I knew I would be busy with my music. So I literally forgot about my manuscript until December of this past year. And then I felt now I have the time, I'm finished the studio work. Now I have the time to go through any edits. And I made a really strict edit of it myself.
Hmm.
And then I had one more editor go through it. And then I was ready to publish it. So that's sort of the journey. So it was an idea that originated quite some time ago.
Hmm.
But I'm sure glad I never threw that manuscript away. It must have been always something saying, "Don't do that, don't do it,
Beautiful.
leave it, maybe,
Right,
just
right,
maybe." So
right.
that's how that originated. But I got really excited with the whole story and the concept. So my two main characters, they are going to be actually in the next book, because this is going to
Mhm.
be a series.
Right.
They are going to be solving crimes using the paranormal. So
Love it.
yeah, I'm pretty pumped up about it. I've written about part of it so far. I've just it's summer, and so it's a little distracting. I have a big garden and big property that my husband and I do a lot of work outside in the summer months. So but I'm anxious to get back to it. But whenever I have ideas, I jot them
Mhm.
down. Actually,
Yeah.
I record them in my phone. I don't
Yep.
write much
That's
down.
what I
I
do.
just get it's quicker to get the idea done
Absolutely.
by
Yep.
recording it. But
Yep.
yeah, so that's the history behind how that book evolved.
Beautiful. I love the idea that, in my opinion, in the spirit of the podcast, if something's inspired, it will transcend, right? And it'll stand the test of time and you'll see the merit in it decades later if it was inspired in the first place. My mom there was a little short story, I guess it was at the time, that always sat in the cupboard above our refrigerator throughout the 70s, 80s, 90s until we moved out of that house. And she finally, like you, dusted it off at the age of probably 65, and it became a children's book, and she learned Photoshop in order to illustrate it herself. It was
Wow.
so inspiring. And I will say, my first young adult novel, that's how I met you, Virginia,
Mhm.
The Nameless Prince. I started writing, same thing, started writing it for my first niece. She's 43 now with three kids of her own. I have 22 nieces and nephews. They're all grown up. I have great nieces and nephews. So when I finally dusted it off and finished it, I dedicated it to not the little girl that I started writing it for, but the 43-year-old, and
Oh,
said it's
I
never
love
too
that.
late, right?
No,
Yeah.
no, it's not. And I think it's a good lesson for us all that no
Mhm.
matter what you write, even if it's not complete, whatever you write, keep it, save it.
Absolutely.
Because the root of the idea was inspired,
Yep.
and you're right, if it stands the test of time, then it's viable. But
Hmm.
also I think those years gave me more insight as
Absolutely.
well,
Yep.
and so that the core idea, it was easy to develop it.
Hmm.
And I
Mhm.
think that having waited instead of writing it at the time,
Hmm.
um, I think the book benefited from that time that I waited.
Yep. I see
Strangely
that.
enough, I think it became something more than it
Yeah,
would have
well, I'm
had I
guessing
finished.
your understanding of human nature and the world we live in has more perspective, right? So
Precisely.
I relate to that too. Like sometimes I wasn't ready to write something. I thought I was, but it wasn't the right time. And then later you have the perspective to write it.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I was gonna say, I think like with with you slowing down and kind of, going into other avenues as well. And then of course tying it back to like how your youth growing up and having more of that, having the mediums and all, and people coming in and talking about the different paranormal kind of stuff as a kid. I think you had a better, view to look at it at that point in time. I know like
Mm,
when I first started writing, the first story I wrote was actually it was based on my dad. It was actually a relative it was a true story with a few, of course, adaptations to it. But it was my dad's story about how he got into flying
Mm,
as a kid, and I had written as a short story to submit to get into the writing program that I went to learn to become a writer.
mhm.
And I went back and dusted off. It actually got published in a children's magazine years
Wow.
later after
What a
I
tribute to your dad.
yeah,
Oh,
so
that's lovely.
so it's interesting, like hearing you both talk about it, kind of like, kind of your first, steps into writing. I mean, I think we all kind of start with, as they always say, with something and is,
Mhm.
close to you, but you have to come back at it later to
If you
really
don't if you don't mind, I
solidify
want to dovetail off of that again,
it.
back to the spirit of the podcast. Hang in there,
Hmm.
Angela. I do think we'll all have something to say about this. But Anya, if you remember that, Virginia kind of
Hmm.
talked about. She's a writing coach, and she talks about how really when you write something at 21. And then let's say later you want to write your memoirs. So you're including essays from right when you were 21 and you're now 56. My sister and I have both experienced this. How much do you mess with that voice, whether it was naive or lacked perspective? Do you mess with it? Because I find myself cleaning up stuff that I wrote at 21 and it just has a completely different worldview. So she was kind of saying, it's a real art getting it to live under one umbrella, but honoring your limitations at that time. I noticed when I read your book, Angela, it's very contemporary. And I love meaning. I love the technology. I love the texting. I think one of the characters, even in just the first two chapters, didn't they Google something? And I just loved how contemporary it felt. Did you think about that much, or did it just
I
happen because we live in 2024?
No, I absolutely thought about it, and I did this deliberately. One, because we live in this age, so I wanted it to be contemporary.
Right.
But
Hmm.
also, that was one of the things that, reading a 35 plus year old manuscript, I was
Mhm.
realizing, oh my goodness, like we don't pick up the phone to do these things anymore. We don't, I just wanted it to be contemporary. So that was part of some of the cleanup that I did. I wanted it to be I wanted it to be relevant to today. I didn't
Yep.
want to write something
Mhm.
from, 35 odd years
Yep.
ago. I
Well,
wanted it
just
to be
just some feedback
contemporary,
though.
so deliberate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, just a tiny bit of feedback. The beauty of that is it doesn't just feel relevant or contemporary, but it makes it immediate, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
Precisely.
I feel like I'm in
Yeah.
that world.
Precisely. And I had fun doing that actually. Like I'm going to be reading a chapter I understand a little bit later. And you'll see that I've incorporated it in this particular chapter as well, where they learn something pretty dramatic.
Mhm.
And what do we do when we learn something or we want to verify? We all Google it or we look it up later because we want to know more. We want to learn more. And
Right.
so, we don't head to the library anymore,
Right.
shuffle through microfiche or
Right,
whatever.
exactly,
We
right.
we do we use the technology that's available, and so you're right. I love that word you chose, immediate. Yes, that's very
Mhm.
good.
Well, I was
Yep.
gonna say, and I was say even with that, because I only got to read the first chapter of the book, just because of things that I've been dealing with, so I didn't have time to really dive in like I wanted to. But I'm a huge fan of Jim Butcher, who also it did kind of similar to what you're doing, but there are different aspects to it. But blends. I don't know if you guys know who he is, but anyways, he has the series, The Dresden Files, which is a wizard who's a private investigator, to give you an
Mhm.
idea. So again, kind of delves into that paranormal spiritualism aspect.
Mhm.
And but what I love is how like Dominic was saying, how you've got that contemporary element, but you're able to bring in that spiritualism and how, you know, old and ancient
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
is, and it just blends seamlessly. And so it does draw you in, and yet you've got basically like modern day technology, tied in with, these long time cultural, deep rooted belief systems at the same
Mhm.
time, which is just
Mhm,
beautiful.
Mhm.
mhm.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Those are my favorite kinds of stories where you juxtapose the old and the new, and it really makes you think, doesn't it, about
Hmm.
what is universal in the human experience and what, again, stands the test of time, and it just gives it more resonance. If does that make sense to tell a contemporary story what was the one with, oh, my brain and names today? Uh, oh my God. There's a million, but there's a movie that is kind of a cult classic, and I can't think of her name. But it's, or even, I guess, Lestat, right? The vampire
Hmm.
stories, when you bring in generations, or even in Wuthering Heights, how there's a resonance to the fact that it spans so many generations. Scarlet
Hmm.
Letter does the same thing.
Mhm.
You kind of see the metaphysical threads that tie past, present, and future together. And that's the best way I can say it, because I can't think of the name of that damn movie. But I'm gonna take this opportunity. I would love to hear your excerpt, if you don't mind, Angela. But can I just read the book jacket blurb as a
Sure,
way
by
of,
all
yeah?
means.
If
Please,
you don't
yeah, that
mind,
would
I'm
be a
just gonna
great way
read
to
it.
introduce the chapter, actually. That'd be cool.
Okay, yeah. Just for our listeners, I'll do my best, and then you can share an excerpt. So here's what I've got from the interwebs, as we said, because that's where we get all of our information these days. Since childhood, David Harris has suffered from debilitating nightmares. He sought the advice of psychiatrists and other health professionals without obtaining any relief. When he meets an attractive young psychic, Emma Jackson, she encourages him to seek the help of her friend, Anna Tungsten, a hypnotherapist. During an emotionally charged past life regression, David learns he was murdered in his most recent reincarnation, 30 years earlier. When David realizes his murderer is still alive, he cannot move on and builds a new life with Emma until he has exacted revenge and stopped the murderer from killing again.
Hey,
Yeah, so do you feel like sharing an excerpt?
yeah. Actually, I'm going to read from chapter 12 because chapter 12 is in the aftermath of David having had this past life regression. And so
Perfect.
the title of the chapter is called George Samuel Larson. David opened his eyes. A nagging feeling told him that something of extreme importance had occurred, but he could not quite grasp what it was. He was certain he had seen the eyes during the session. He heard Anna say, "Wake up, David," but he was too weak and groggy to answer right away. He saw Anna's worried eyes and said, "Something happened, didn't it?" "Yes, we had a breakthrough, but you gave us a scare." "What happened?" "You relived the death of your former life. It was traumatic, and I had trouble bringing you out of the trance." "Did we learn anything worthwhile?" "David, you were named George Larson, and either worked or lived here in New Elgin in your previous life." She paused. "You died at the age of 32 on December 15th, 1993. David stared ahead and said, "So you really think my dreams are not just nightmares, but actual memories from a past life?" "Yes, I do." Her expression was thoughtful. "It's unusual, though." "What is?" asked Emma. "Normally, souls don't reincarnate so soon after death.
Mm.
Unless, unless, David swallowed the lump forming in his throat. The trauma was so great, the soul needed to return sooner.
Mm.
David interrupted. "I was murdered, wasn't I?"
Mm.
"Yes, I think so. I'll review the recording and prepare a transcript for you, but my impression is that you saw and may even have known your killer. This is a lot to process. I'd recommend you review the transcripts and then we can schedule another session." "I wonder." David looked back and forth between Anna and Emma, his face pinched with concern. "Yes?" asked Anna. "If this is all real, and I was murdered 30 years ago, there's a good chance the killer could still be alive." "True," said Anna, "and still be relatively young, possibly still in his 50s, maybe even early 60s. "What are you thinking?" asked Emma. "Hang on a sec." David grabbed his iPhone and typed in his query. "Just found this website called Canada Cold Cases. It's a database of unsolved murders and disappearances." "Is there a search tool?" asked Emma, unable to hide her excitement. "Yep. Typing in George Larson. Oh my God, I've got a hit." His face turned white. He turned the display around for both Anna and Emma to read. "Canada Cold Cases, George Samuel Larson, updated March 15th, 2023. On the evening of Wednesday, December 15th, 1993, between the hours of 6 and 7, 32-year-old Officer George Samuel Larson of the New Elgin Police Service was shot in the head. He was off duty at the time and was killed en route to an appointment with his lawyer, Liam Foster, of the law firm Foster and Harris. His murder is believed to be a completely random act of violence. In the almost 30 years since his death, there have been no suspects, and this case remains unsolved. His sister, Sarah Marie Larson, says, George's untimely death led to my mother's suicide in 1994. The killer not only took my brother's life, but also my mother's.
Mm.
If you have any information relating to this case, please contact Detective Brian Grant of the New Elgin Police Service. What? Isn't that the name of your law firm? Emma said with a mixture of awe and fear. Exactly. David's complexion remained pasty white. They mentioned Liam Foster. He's my uncle. This is bizarre. Emma's face had lost its color. It's also tragic. Sarah lost her mom too, said Anna. Look, there's a picture of George, said Emma, pointing at the screen. Can you enlarge it? David expanded the image with his right index finger and thumb. His face blanched even further. He looks familiar. Not unusual for you to recognize your former self, said Anna. Odd. Samuel's my middle name, too. His voice was toneless.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's my review. Wow. Virginia, jump in if you want, but I just want to say I think you chose the perfect excerpt because
Mhm.
that was the most intriguing thing for me in just reading the synopsis and then starting the book was I guess over the years I've kind of thought I don't know much about the academic views on reincarnation or even the philosophical tradition behind it. Don't know much. But I've often thought that, like, how quickly are we reincarnated and what an interesting concept to think your murderer is still walking around. I
Mm-hmm.
feel like the older I get, the more feasible that is, right? That I don't know, I'm just fascinated with again the links between past, present and future. And that excerpt too to me illustrated our interconnectivity, how our lives and our spiritual journeys are all intertwined. I had an
Mhm.
office mate at Disney whose brother committed suicide. And of
Oh,
course, it affected the entire family for the duration of their lives.
of
So the
course.
idea that a suicide resulted from this horrific murder just illustrates our interconnectivity, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
makes it, I was gonna say it makes me think about how the chain of events basically that we don't realize the decisions we make, how they cascade out
Hmm.
into other people's lives, that the interconnectivity. And then, you add to that, if you wherever you are, on a spiritual level, that as well. Because I know I always so for example, so here's just kind of a fun tidbit. So my best friend and I, we've known each other since we were literally fresh out of diapers, but our parents all went to college together before any of them married, and of course had us. And so it's just we never think about that until we get
Hmm.
together and we're visiting with our families, and all of a sudden our parents are talking like, oh yeah, back when we were in college, and and we're like, oh that's right, you guys all went to college together, and that's right. And if you get, because we forget that. And so
Hmm.
my best friend, I always joke because when people meet
But
her,
it's the thing is, it's still playing out,
yeah,
right?
so it's
Like our
exact,
parents' baggage
yeah,
and even intergenerational trauma just has
hmm,
its way with you, even if it's unexamined. Anyway, I
exactly,
wanted you to keep
yeah.
going, but this is what I write about is all the baggage that's not talked about, but it still has its way with you, right? Especially the
Right.
secrets.
Yeah, exactly. Like secrets will come out. But my friend and I always joke because everybody's like, well, how now we've gotten to the point as we've gotten older, now that we're in our, entering our 50s, is we just like people are like, well, how you guys know each other? We're like, well, are you talking about here on the planet or like back when we were in the womb? Because I
Right,
mean, if you think
right.
about like our parents were all hanging out and in the same, inner circles with each other way before
Mhm.
we were born. So we're like, I don't know, maybe we were always destined to be friends. Who knows?
Or you're even overhearing stuff through the membrane. right?
Yeah,
You're
right.
absorbing the energetic content, the
Mhm.
vibration, the thoughts and
Yeah.
feelings.
Yeah, so it's interesting how, when you think about past lives, or reincarnation. I mean, even if you don't subscribe to that belief, I mean, just when you just think about it in general, or if you subscribe to it, I mean, it's really kind of interesting. Like, how far out do those tentacles
Mm.
reach each other?
Mhm. Angela, do you have anything to say, or did we take this somewhere completely way out in the weeds?
Not at all. I was really enjoying it because part of what I do address in this book is soul groups. And
Mm, yes.
there's this belief that people reincarnate as soul groups. And
Mhm.
so you'll have maybe one time someone might be your brother, the next time your
Mm,
mother.
Mhm.
Um, but the idea is that you sort of make plans in the in between world
mhm,
um, to see what you can learn, how you can better yourself, and how you can interact with certain individuals in a more positive way. So it's sort of like trying to get it right. That's the way
mhm.
I've
Yeah.
always looked at
Mhm,
it as far as
Mhm.
reincarnation goes. And
mhm,
so I believe that groups of souls do reincarnate together.
mhm,
And I think, Virginia, in what you described, I think it's very highly likely that you were meant to be with these friends that while they were still in the womb. I think this is destiny. Whether
mhm,
it's from reincarnation or something else, it definitely, to me, is something that was preordained or
mm,
predestined. I'm certain of it.
Yeah,
mhm,
and I do believe that, and it's interesting you made that comment about soul groups, because my mom and I, because we're mother and daughter, we've had our differences, and she always tells me, I don't know if you're right about this, but I've told her my whole entire life that if she wasn't my mom in this life, she was my best friend in another life. And she
aw,
always laughs
Mhm.
at me
mhm,
because we're very opposite of each other.
mhm,
But that's just because we're mom and daughter. So of course we, ruffle each other's feathers. But as a person, like if I take out the mother aspect and, daughter roles, um, yeah, her and I really do connect. And I've always felt that her and I in another life were best friends, you
Mhm.
know.
Yeah, that
So
wouldn't surprise me, because the whole idea is that we do make plans together,
mhm.
and we learn from each other. We learn how to deal with certain relationships,
mhm,
and uh, and I also and I also think that some of the more advanced souls are very comfortable being in either gender, and I'm
mhm,
really
mhm,
beginning to wonder nowadays if there's more understanding about people who associate with both genders in the
mhm,
same body. And I've been beginning to think, is it because they've lived so many lives that they are so comfortable with associating with both genders that this becomes a very normal and
right.
comfortable for them?
Mhm.
And I wonder if that's one of the reasons. And if it is, isn't that awfully nice? Because it
Mm,
just means that we can sort of expand our expression and our understanding of, instead of, oh, he's a guy, that's what guys do, or
mm.
she, that's what women do, like, for heaven's sakes, that's typical. Isn't it nice if we begin to embrace what is likely a part of all of us, which
Mm.
is understanding both sexes?
Mhm.
Well, it's funny you would mention that because one of my questions that I actually have written down in front of me is I wanted to talk a little bit about writing from a male protagonist's perspective. So,
Hmm.
to add to what you just said, I would say there is a convergence going on in a lot of areas in our dialectic and our evolution, right? There's a merging of left and right brain sensibilities. Hopefully, if we can make it through this impact, well, here in the United States, I won't say too
Oh,
much, but if we
don't
can
say
make
too
it,
much.
yeah, if we can make it over this hump, I do think we're on the path toward convergence. But I
Mhm.
also think that that's what it is to be an artist in some ways, is to have access to the whole of human experience, whether you subscribe to Carl Jung or the Reservoir of Archetypes or Collective Unconscious or whatever. That's what it is largely to be a writer. If
Mhm.
Emily Bronte could write Wuthering Heights without much worldly experience, that tells you we can tap into the whole of human experience. So,
Precisely.
yeah. So I
Mhm.
love that. I also really related to to this idea of contracts, that we do have spiritual contracts with people or agreements. And you are the first person I've heard really say it. I've always said, yeah, there's clusters of consciousness that are attracted to each other for whatever reason. And yeah, I've gone as far as to say maybe it's unfinished business or baggage that needs to be reconciled. But I love hearing you say it. So I guess if you don't mind, I mean, anything you have to say about this idea that I've been told I write well for women. And I mean, it's easy. I'm a gay man. But I'm very complimented when people say that. I do think that's what it is to be a writer. Did you have any challenges? And I will say I don't know the narrative mode of your novel yet. I'm only 2 chapters in, and I do believe the second chapter seems to be from her point of view. Is it omniscient, or are you trying to stick in his head? Just because I'm not that far
Um,
into it yet.
I when I'm writing particular chapters, there may be situations where I'm writing from different characters' points of view,
Right.
which is why I'm writing in third person.
Okay, there you go.
You'd asked about the protagonist being a male protagonist, and
Hmm.
um, I didn't find it that difficult to do. I found growing up, it was rather isolated, and I really looked up towards my dad. There were no brothers in our family. I was the oldest, and I was a tomboy. And so I didn't really subscribe to a lot of the girly things that, during that age, makeup and, primping and looking pretty. It didn't really matter to me. It wasn't important. What was important was, being outside working with my dad, chopping wood. And we had a lot of conversations as we were growing up. And some of them, when I was in my teens and early 20s, we had some pretty mature conversations where my dad really started to show me the male point of view, the way he would feel about certain things, on a deep level. And I really appreciated that, because I felt that at that point my dad was no longer my dad but my friend too.
Mhm.
And so it was really formative for me. And also, I always found that, if I was with a group of people, I always enjoyed the camaraderie and the joking around with the guys a little bit more. And so um, I think that it was easy for me to sort of absorb how they felt, their feelings, how they looked at things, how they behaved. And
Hmm.
so I hope that David is a credible character. I believe I show his uncertainties and his vulnerabilities, but also his strengths.
Hmm.
And I hope that I have accomplished a good voice for my protagonist. But I think the influence of knowing, of being friends with, having males as friends on a platonic level and being able to talk with them. And my dad was really the first one that I interacted with. I think that has given me a good, solid perspective into writing a male character.
Hmm. Beautiful. Yeah, I don't think you need to defend it at all. I just was wondering if, you know, there was a learning curve or if it puts you in touch with anything you hadn't thought about. But that sounds like the perfect basis, right? For
Yeah,
writing from the other gender, of
that's
course.
right. I felt comfortable with that. It wasn't something I really had to think about. And of course, um, when I was writing, they kind of tell you, I don't know, I
They
guess you
tell
pull
you,
it from the
yeah,
etheric, they
right.
you pull it from the etheric and they say, I am here, this is me, this is how I think. And so they become real people. And so
Absolutely.
I think once that happens, you can
Hmm.
be true to their characters, because you're not there, nothing's forced. It's
Hmm.
just flowing
I love
from
it.
from the universal intelligence. It's just coming
Yes.
to you. And so that you instinctively know that that's how that character should be. And I've had two characters now in the first book. When I finished reading this chapter to you, I mentioned to contact a detective, Brian Grant. Well, I thought that he would be a very minor character, and no matter
Hmm.
what I did, he kept stepping forward and saying, I am here, listen to
Right,
me,
right,
I
right.
need to do
Give me
this to help.
airtime. Give.
That's right. I need to be here so I can help Emma and David with their search for the killer better. So listen up. It
Right.
was kind of funny. And in my second book, in my first book, I have a character, a barista, The name is Megan, and Megan is a they them. That's how Megan
Yes.
associates
Mhm.
I
the
met her,
identity.
and I think
Oh,
I already met
you
her.
read about Megan.
Chapter
Mhm.
2,
So
yeah.
for heaven's sakes, Megan in the second book has said, "I'm here. I want a bigger role." So okay, step forward.
I
So it's interesting. So I think they kind of tell you, I don't know why, but they kind
Yes.
of step
Yep,
forward and they say, "I'm here, listen to me. This is what I need to do to make the story work."
yep.
So,
yeah, I say
Virginia,
that.
jump in because I
I was
have a
yeah,
transition.
I
Go.
was gonna say that totally resonates, with me because I love that you've identified that delicate dance between the gender representation and having it come out very authentically. And to
Mhm.
me, that just goes into the whole. It's not about archetypes. It's really about fully realizing the individual and their struggles and their vulnerabilities and the fact that there is duality
Mhm.
in everybody
Yep.
in real life. So the fact that that resonates in your characters is just phenomenal.
no, thank you. And yes, you're right. There is a duality of this in all of us. And I think the sooner we understand and acknowledge that, then we will understand, we will have a better understanding for our fellow human beings.
Hmm.
Yeah, the universal is where it's at, is right, especially in art and literature. We're trying to tap into the universal.
Hmm.
And I've said this on the podcast before, like again, being a gay man, like I'm just not invested in the war between the sexes. It bores me, frankly.
Hmm.
So I do often offer a unique perspective from a gay man's point of view. I like to mix it up and just say, hey, in the gay community, by the way, dot dot dot, like, and I just think interconnectivity is where it's at. The merging that we talked about earlier is the path we're on. So
Hmm.
I get frankly bored by the war between the sexes, and
Yeah,
men are from Mars, women are from Venus,
oh, I
all of
hate
that.
it too. I think it's ridiculous. Whenever I hear that, or especially here, oh well, guys, they don't help around the house, or
Yeah,
women,
right, right.
they don't know how to drive, or all the stupid stereotypical tropes that you hear.
Mhm.
I hate that.
Whenever
This
I
is not
hear
true.
Yes. Well, whenever I hear it's something that does kind of ring true. I'll hear one of those, I guess, stereotypes about men are dot dot dot, and I
Hmm.
think, well, actually, women are too. It just looks different on them. So every
Hmm.
time I hear a generalization, I can go, okay, here's the female version of that.
I love that.
Or
That's
if I
good.
hear women are catty, then I'm like, okay, let me tell you the male version of that. We are
Yeah,
fucking sorry. We're human. We
yeah,
all right. Even like when
exactly.
people say, "Oh, the French are dot dot dot."
Oh,
Well, I've lived there, and I would walk away going, you know what? We're all just human. We do have the same range of emotions and desires, and sure, there are cultural values that allow for things to be expressed differently, but largely we're all human. But
Hmm.
I want to steer back a little bit to the spirit of the podcast, just
yes,
in some things that I heard just now, and it just seemed like a great transition. I think you hinted at, again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but this idea that yes, inspiration comes from maybe universal intelligence or collective consciousness, and that's what the creative process is.
yes.
So, a moment ago, when you said my characters take on a life of their own, I
Mhm.
wanted to say two things. Virginia, on this podcast, it's come up a lot how
Hmm.
I, Madeline Lingle will say, "Oh, I didn't expect for that character to die, but they just had to."
Right.
So that happens in my writing all the time. They tell you, right? Like you're saying, they tell you
Hmm.
the role they want to play. And
Mhm.
so I totally relate to that. But also, oh, you are writing a sequel. I think you said it's going to become a series.
Yes, it is.
So, yeah, I
Absolutely.
feel the same way about my young adult novel became there was a sequel and now it's become a trilogy, and sure, the third book is as yet unwritten, but it became a trilogy precisely because I fell in love with not just the world I created but the characters. I am spending time with them, I'm communing with them when I honor them by writing about them. Do you feel
Yes.
like they're your children? Am I putting Did you say that, or is that my word?
I don't think I did, but they're certainly close friends.
Right,
Some of them are not close friends, shouldn't be friends, but they're there too.
right. I
You
just
know,
feel like I'm spending time with them, and it's comfort food for
yeah,
me to step back
absolutely.
into those worlds and spend time with
Totally
those
agree.
characters.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
So, do you mind talking a little bit more about your understanding of this? Again, I don't want to use my terminology, but again, in your, I think, form that you filled out, you did say you feel the creative process is a way of tapping into, I'm using the word universal intelligence. How would you put that?
Well, yes, I actually often use that expression, universal intelligence, as well. And what I believe is that um, if we quiet our minds,
Mm,
whether it's through meditating or walking in a forest, a lot of my ideas come through, working in the garden or walking in the forest.
mm,
If you just quiet your mind, there's so much that just comes to you. And I'm not even sure if it's me writing it sometimes or thinking it or a melody that comes through. It just is there. And so I've always felt that it's tapping into something higher, something beautiful, an energy that we don't always understand on this level, but
mhm,
is definitely real and is palpable if we take the time to listen and feel it.
mm,
And yeah, so yeah, I truly believe that there is a higher power that we can tap into in order for the good. And I suppose if someone was oriented a certain way, they could tap into that power in a maybe not so lovely way also. But for
yes.
me, I prefer to use that beautiful energy for good and for creation. And so I know that it's there. If
Mhm,
I take the time to be peaceful and quiet, it's there for me.
mhm,
And it's there
beautiful.
for everybody.
Mhm. Yes. Virginia, I feel like you might have something to say, but the way I relate to that is, yeah, the creative life is the creative process, right? God is the most tapping into the divine. The creative process is the most divine thing one can engage in. And life is create, right? We're creating our own lives
Mhm.
all day, every day. And
Yes.
so,
Yeah.
but traditionally, I don't put much thought into creative instincts as evil. But I had to really put some thought into it at one point because there are those who feel it can be used for good or evil. And I guess I had to think, well, yeah, look at
Yeah.
all those, look at nuclear bombs, for example. That is creativity in action, but
Mhm.
it's been hijacked somehow.
Yes.
So I find it interesting. Do you want to talk a little bit about how one can be misguided in their creative efforts, or how it can? Evil is a silly word, right? But it can
Yeah.
feel destructive as opposed to contributing to our evolution. And my way of putting everything you just said, I totally, you're speaking our language, put it that way.
Mhm.
But
Oh,
I guess I
excellent.
feel like it's, if you want to be real empirical about it and put on a Newtonian cap, I would say we are being called upon by evolution. It's in our DNA to be our best selves and to contribute our unique gifts back into the collective, just in terms of propagation, right? On a real biological level, we're meant to be our best selves and to contribute. But I do see it as way more spiritual than that.
Yeah.
But anyway, I haven't thought too much about using creative instincts for good or evil. Do you have anything to say about that?
Um, I think it's possible that someone could tap into that energy and um, because of their own proclivity towards destructiveness.
Mhm.
Yes, you know what? I think so because you see, thoughts are things. And
Mm, mm,
so we have the power to either make a positive outcome for ourselves in this life,
mhm,
but we also, if we tap into, um, if we're oriented in a negative way and we
mhm,
tap into that energy, then I think it transforms into something that is not a happy life for
mhm,
you. So I do think thoughts are things. I do
mm,
think that if you have a negative viewpoint, you're tapping into that energy and you're using that energy in a negative, destructive way, either
mhm.
towards yourself or others. So yes, I think it's the same energy source,
To
but
tap to
it's
tie it back,
choice.
yeah, I
Hmm?
love it. Yes, I agree.
But it's a
Well,
choice that you make. And maybe
mhm,
there is a biological, maybe it is in the DNA to have either a more positive desire compared to a negative proclivity to poor thinking, unhealthy eating, unhealthy ways of viewing the world. I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of sadness going on right now.
I
So
like what I like you hinted that it was free will, and
mhm,
I'm gonna go with nurture on that one more so than nature.
Hmm.
because maybe, I mean, I'm just processing and formulating what you said. It seems to me maybe when it sort of leans toward the destructive, right? Creativity and destruction are opposite sides of the same coin. So
Yes.
maybe when it leans toward destructive, it's a lack of love.
Hmm.
I would say it could be that. I also think it's behavior. So a lot of times it's behavior driven. So it can be either behavior that's been modeled or bad coping. So it's not like, I mean, I'm not going to say there aren't people who intentionally do things, because obviously there is people who intentionally do stuff too. But usually when they intentionally do it, it's because they have learned bad modeling
I was going to say, but
behavior.
modeled
Yeah.
models
Right.
are
Yes.
nurture,
Yeah.
their nurture and their environment. And they
Mm.
are the product of a lack of love, whether it's
Right.
in the previous generation or 5 generations back.
Yeah.
That's what we need to recognize,
Hmm.
actually, right? Is the ripple
Right.
effect that we've been talking about this whole
Yeah.
episode.
Yeah. That's exactly where I was going with it. Is, when you look at into that deeper kind of, path, that's where it all stems from. And you're
Mm,
right. I mean, the more that we come together as a community and support each other and encourage, the less you're going to see the creative process be
mm.
used for, evil ways, versus positive and uplifting.
It's got to be a global shift,
Hmm.
right? Yeah.
Exactly. Hmm.
Well, I think we've solved all the world's problems here today.
Well, at least recognize them and have sort of a game plan.
Well, that's our goal really is to just contribute to the conversation. We don't have the answers here, but I do like Virginia. We've created a forum where we share
Hmm.
ideas and it
Right.
is a contribution. Let's just keep the dialogue going because truly the fascism I was hinting at earlier, again, you might not be feeling it in Canada, but certainly it's lingering on the horizon here.
Yeah,
And
actually,
without naming any names, there are
yeah.
other fascist dictators that if they had their way would join in one world order, and we're here to combat that. Aristotle and you and I and
Yes,
Virginia.
and Virginia. We actually in Canada, we're very aware of what happens. And so it we are, I feel worried for your country.
Thank you. Help!
um,
Help!
and relieved that there is a new Democrat uh,
Yes,
candidate now.
we love her.
I'm
Yeah,
hoping that
yeah.
that's better. I've heard yays and nays for that. I know we don't want to get political, but I do fear for your country, and I hope that the outcome will be positive, and that there will be enough healing energy to see your country through, no matter what the outcome will be in November. But
Mhm.
I must say that we listen keenly all the time. And my husband and I, we made a trip to California a couple of years ago, and we stayed at this lovely bed and breakfast in wine country. And
Mhm.
host said, and I felt so sad because she sounded like a Canadian, and she says, "I apologize for my country."
Right,
And
right,
I said, "Oh, please don't do that. Please don't do that."
right.
You know,
Well, it's
because
funny because it's almost like you can criticize your own family, but God forbid somebody else say a word about your family, you're going to defend
yeah,
them. So I've
yeah,
often defended my country knowing better, but
sure. I just
lately
felt
I
so
feel,
sad when she said that to me.
uh, no,
Yeah,
I find myself apologizing all lately. I didn't used to. I used to defend. Now I just, yeah, shake my head and apologize.
yeah.
Yeah. We're
But we
not
really
as
loved California, and we thought, wow, everybody in California, they feel like Canadians, except they get to have nicer weather.
Well, in Central, right? You have
Right.
this standoff between NorCal and SoCal, and but yeah, I think wine country was the perfect place to land. I'll say that.
Yeah, it was nice.
Yeah,
We really enjoyed it. It was a wonderful trip.
that's good.
Well, I think we've hit on some really beautiful stuff. Thank you
Mhm.
so much. I know it's going to be inspiring for listeners. In an effort to sort of steer it to a close, I wonder if there's any final words of wisdom you would love to share with listeners. And then, of course, at the end, we'll put links to your book and your album. You have been on fire, my friend.
Mhm.
They were kind of neck and neck, right? The
Yeah,
the
they
album and the
were.
book.
Yeah, literally. As I had explained, the first half of last year was writing the book, and then I put that aside, and then I
Mhm,
focused my concentration on the album. But
mhm,
after that, there was still editing processes on both
mhm,
projects that were done earlier this
mhm.
year. So yeah, it was glorious. I just loved it. I can't
I
wait.
meant to say at that when you mentioned that you took your attention off the book to work on the album,
Mhm.
did you find that then you could see the forest for the trees when you went back to it? Meaning, sometimes we don't have perspective and we need a break from the work.
Oh,
Did
I
you have,
needed a
yeah.
break. Yeah. Yeah. I think everyone should take a break.
Mm,
I think that when you write a book
mhm,
or any work of art like this,
mhm.
you need a period of time for it to sort of settle
Yeah.
and for, having, you were talking about the lost keys earlier, and if you stop thinking about
Yes,
I
yes.
remember a name or lost keys or whatever it is, then you get a fresh perspective. And it's that fresh perspective that
Mhm.
you need so desperately, whether it's finding a lost item or reassessing what you've written after 3 or 4 months. So
Yeah,
I think it's good to have that cooling off period because you can be super objective then.
I love
And
it.
so
Well, and
words.
also, I think we get really precious about our choices too when we don't step away from it. So maybe the universality, not the commercial appeal, right? But the universality might lie in taking that step back and then
Mhm,
coming back to it with a more universal perspective.
exactly. I think that's really important. So you asked for words of wisdom.
Yeah. No pressure. I just
Well,
anything you would
okay.
like to share, put it that way.
Yeah. I think for anyone who's an aspiring writer, don't get rid of anything that you write.
Mm,
Save it, um, and realize that there's not always, it may not be the right time to finish a piece or even start a piece, but be confident in yourself and know that there will be a right time. Just let that, again, that piece fall on you so that you
mhm,
can create. Um, and also, I would say the other bit of advice is it's never too late to start a
mm,
project.
mhm,
It's never too late to go take those singing lessons or write that book or whatever artistic endeavor that interests you, or whether it's something to do with athleticism and you want to run a marathon or climb
mhm,
a mountain. It's never too late. Just
mm,
make sure that you take the time for training and for and be humble to accept the wisdom of others so that they can share with you, and you in turn by learning will also be able to teach them. So I
mm.
think, again, this whole universality theme that we've talked about this today, I think is really important. So stay connected with each other's um, stay connected with each other and honor what is in each other. And I guess I can't really think of anything else.
No,
Just
that's beautiful. It's so
yeah.
funny how, themes create themselves. The
Mhm,
first time I did an interview at 19 in college, I interviewed street people, whatever that means. I went to a halfway house and interviewed, they call them squatters and teenage runaways. And they had some interviews lined up, but then the kids didn't show up. So I said, and I was 19 myself, so they were my peers, just
mhm,
with different circumstances. So I said, well, I'm just going to go out on the street and interview the shoe shine man, and actually interviewed a male prostitute on Santa Monica Boulevard. I was a weird 19-year-old. And so I wrote up, I recorded the interviews back then on a little handheld recorder, and then I wrote them up and I painted their portraits. But man,
mhm.
I was blown away at night.
Wow.
It was amazing, but it really opened my eyes like, wow, life is a story in the spirit of the podcast. And themes created themselves within a half an hour interview, and they came back around just like in good writing, right? You
Mhm.
drop a motif and that motif comes back around. So I
Yeah,
feel like that happened today. And what
did.
the words of wisdom I put a gun to your head and made you share were to me the themes that kind of emerged, weren't they?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Yeah,
Well, I
there's
love
certain
this.
things.
This was wonderful. I love talking with both of you. This was amazing.
Well, we often say we'll have you back for a part two. You don't need to
Yes.
have a book coming out, anytime. I think you'll be really inspiring to our guests. So thank you.
Okay, well, I would love that. I'd love to come back anytime you have me. That's nice. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. We love having kindred spirits with us on the show.
Yes, I could really feel that there's a real connection. I enjoyed that very much.
Well, thank you. And Virginia, we will be putting links in the episode
Hmm.
description. Is that
Yep,
right?
exactly. So
Awesome.
everybody can find out more about you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you
Thank
so
you so
much.
much.
All right.
For our listeners, remember, life is story, and we can get our hands in the clay. Individually and collectively, we can write a new story. See you next time.